Good morning, everybody. Welcome. This is the morning meeting live here on the two-way platform and also on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, today's the day I'm going to start reading from the chat and calling out people who put garbage in there by name, even if you've got some crazy screen name like Panda47. Thank you for joining. We love having you watch the program and we love having you participate. If you're here on the two-way platform, please do it, as some have already done. Raise your electronic hand to be part of the conversation. Last night on Two Way Tonight, we had a guy from Brooklyn and a guy from the west side of LA, Kamala Harris's neighbor. They were fantastic spokespeople for the left. I know you're on here, so please raise your hand, be part of the conversation. This is not a MAGA rally. This is a conversation of all voices, so please join in. Trisha McLaughlin is here of the Buckeye State and of Gotham City. And Trisha, we couldn't be happier to have you here. What have you been up to since we last saw you?
Thanks for having me. These confirmations, just staying on top of it. And this Matt Gaetz, Pete Hegseth, the big five, as you call it, the
Controversial five, now down to four. We have an incredible graphic, which I didn't think we were going to use, but since you mentioned the controversial five, if you guys want to throw that up, because it's kind of humorous, while I run through the day book. And then we'll talk about news of the day, and then we'll take your questions or hear your comments. And again, we're delighted to have you. All right. So there's the graphic, right? And then there were four. We'll see what happens to the other four. But that wasn't my idea. Paul and Audra thought that brilliant idea. Thank you very much. All right. President Biden, daily intelligence brief. And then at 6:30 tonight, they're hosting a dinner on the South Lawn, the president and the first lady. Dan, you invited to that?
No, I am not these days.
Trisha, you going to that dinner?
I didn't snag that invite.
All right. I don't know who's invited to that, but maybe somebody will tell us during this hour. The vice president of the United States, believe, remains in Hawaii, and say it with me, no public events scheduled. Same for Donald Trump, as far as I know. Same for J.D. Vance, as far as I know. So it's somewhat of a slow day. Thus, the centerpiece of our day occurs immediately after this program goes off the air, when the Capitol Christmas tree arrives on the west front of the Capitol. Maybe if they come early, we'll have live coverage. We'll play us off the air with live coverage of the arrival of Christmas tree. All right. So let's start with Matt Gaetz. I'm not saying it's the last time we'll ever discuss Matt Gaetz, but it'll be the last time we discuss him probably this week, except tonight on Two-Way Tonight at a special time, 5 Eastern. Trisha, what are the lessons, if any, for the Senate-Trump relationship coming out of the basically Republican senators telling Donald Trump, sorry, he's not being confirmed? Is it a one-off because Matt Gaetz had special issues, or are there some lessons there for both sides?
Yeah, I think that they're flexing a little bit. They obviously have the power and they're not afraid to exercise it. But it wasn't just, right, the more moderate Republicans, the Collins, the Murkowskis of the world. It was, across the gamut, including in the Trump transition team, that voiced some concern. This was taking a massive amount of political capital for Donald Trump. It was taking a massive amount of the airwaves. I mean, it's all CNN has been talking about, but as well, there's probably one or two people who this isn't great for, and that's Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, and maybe RFK, because now the scrutiny is back on them. If you turn on, MSNBC, CNN, any of these mainstream news channels, we're back to looking at investigations on these guys. Are there lessons learned? I think it's going to take a second domino to really say that the moderate Republicans, the John Thunes of the world, are exercising their power here.
Okay, Dan.
Yeah, first off, I will just say I'll eat a little humble pie here. And I said it on.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I have to interrupt you. I meant to do that for all three of us. We all said Gaetz would make it. So, Dan, don't take the fall all by yourself. We all thought he was.
I will, and I want to give a shout out, if she's on here, Meghan McCain, who asked the three men if perhaps we were not taking the allegations, as not that we weren't taking them seriously, but we should take them more seriously, maybe. So, Meghan, kudos for your judgment. Look, I am shocked. I mean, I just did not think that the Trump folks would fold this easily. I think one lesson is, the Senate didn't embarrass him. Like, nobody came out and said, I won't do this. It sounds like everything was being communicated behind the scenes, privately, and Trump heard them, which, kudos to him. He didn't dig in. He didn't pick a fight. He didn't burn more capital down. What I'm curious about now is the headlines in almost every single major publication, and he reads them all very closely, is this showed the limits to Trump's power. And I can't imagine he likes seeing that to end the week before he's even been sworn in, that he's lost a little bit here. And so when we think about Hegseth now, and perhaps the other 4 or the other 3, I'm curious, because if one more goes down, that is a real flex. I mean, you are walking in a little wounded, because I thought that he was at his apex and he would set a precedent and roll the Senate pretty publicly, but I guess not.
Trisha, you want to respond to that?
I was a little surprised by how quickly this happened. I mean, I was wish casting that this was kind of a grand gamemanship by Donald Trump using Matt Gaetz as the bargaining chip or the scalp to give to moderate Republicans. And in reality, I don't think that was what's going on. You don't last 8 days just to be a bargaining chip. I think that he really did see Matt Gaetz as a loyalist, as a firebrand, as somebody who is going to take the DOJ to task and clear house and be just solely loyal to him. So I do think we'll see what happens with these other 4, but I have to agree with Dan. I don't think it's a good harbinger for Donald Trump, especially in the media, if one more person is not confirmed or drops out.
Yep. Excellent. I agree with what you all said. I will say Matt Gaetz is the opposite of Dick Durbin. There's always more going on there than there seems. And so, what his plan was all along, was he fully forthcoming about the allegations that were about to be released? Did senators know things that they haven't said? What's he planned to do next? All that unknown. But I can say with a fairly high degree of confidence, both as a student of Matt Gaetz and also my spidey sense and some reporting, there's more here coming. Maybe, I don't know when it will be known, but there's more here to this story. But the basic outlines, I think you guys nailed perfectly in terms of the politics of it. Pam Bondi, all right. Very familiar to some of us because we've covered her as Attorney General in Florida. She's been very involved in the Trump dramas over the years. Some people may not know her. So let's listen to a bit of the Honorable Pam Bondi.
People got to see 4 years without Donald Trump and to see what happened to our country. And remember his hauntingly prophetic speech in 2020 where he said, what is fuel now? About $2 a gallon? What if Biden got in office, what would it be? $8, $9? And sure enough, look what happened. And again, everything he's done for the economy, but not only that, protecting our borders, building the wall, keeping us safe from this crazy drug abuse and fentanyl problem that he cares so deeply about, and backing the blue. Donald Trump turned our country around after Obama, with your help, our economy, and he has the proven track record to do it again.
I don't know about you all, but I've never seen Hogan Gidley and Larry Kudlow silent for so long. So look, on paper, Attorney General of a mega state, very good on television, familiarity with the range of issues. There's some biographical things that if Democrats were in the majority, I think they'd bring up and maybe try to kill it. But I think this is on a glide path to confirmation, maybe even getting some Democratic votes. Dan, what do you think?
I completely agree with you. I mean, she's kind of a traditionalist Trump person, if that is, it's a little bit of an oxymoron, but, she's got a long track record. She's been a Florida attorney general. I think there'll be deference to that. And where people, I mean, if you start picking apart her biography, that it's not, strong enough, like, I think you get into some dangerous elitist territory a little bit. So I agree with you. I think she sails through, and as people have said, I'm not sure why she wasn't picked, to begin with, but here we are.
Trish, you think she sails through, and you think she'll get any Democratic votes?
Yeah, I think she sails through. I don't know if she'll get any Democrat votes, but what I do think is interesting is when you hear the conversations, at least in the media, that it's starting to go from, of course, the personal allegations and investigations of Matt Gaetz to kind of more the macro argument, which is that Pam Bondi is just going to be a loyalist and that she's going to weaponize the DOJ. So, I mean, that's a good sign for her, because anyone who Donald Trump appoints, that's exactly what they were going to say, that this person is going to be his retribution and that he's going to try and take down his political opponents using it, which I would like to point out that I think Merrick Garland and Joe Biden did that. So it's kind of, are they looking in the mirror? But that's another story.
And by the
Yeah,
way,
well, no,
is
kind of the same
Democrats will go to their graves that they didn't do that, and Merrick Garland dragged his feet forever. Like,
Well, until
the
20.
problem, right? It's the total irony.
All right, let's do a little McLaughlin group. 0 is 0, and 10 is ontological certitude. What are the chances that Pete Hegseth is confirmed? Tricia.
10.
0 is no chance. 10. Dan.
4.
Wow.
4. All right, big difference there. Tricia, what if the woman who's his accuser comes forward, testifies on camera, and is extremely compelling? Even then, it's a 10?
I think that Donald Trump's going to stick by his man. I think that the initial investigation, he was clear. There were no charges brought. This was 8 years ago. I think people know that he was a public figure, and he did give her, financial compensation. So I think that can make the witness look like there's ulterior motives other than that this actually happened. I'm not one to, cast doubt either way. I just think we've kind of seen, we saw what happened with Kavanaugh. Donald Trump stuck with him. And I think Republicans are used to this scrutiny, especially when there's a male nominee, that we've seen this before.
Yeah, I think as I said with Gaetz, which was kind of my Weasley out of his not going forward, the facts will matter. And I think when the facts came out that he had allegedly had a second sexual encounter with a minor, and I do think the Venmo payments were just a bridge too far for a lot of Republican senators. Let's see what happens. I agree with you on the current facts. I think he will be confirmed, although I don't make it quite a 10, but there could be new facts. All right, we're going to do a little bit.
One thing, though, that's similar to Gaetz is you're seeing these stories that the transition was unaware of A, B, and C. And that's what started happening with Gaetz. Like, you started seeing that he hadn't been as forthcoming to them. Today, I saw 2 different stories that said they were unaware about the payment that he made to the woman. Like, that, to me, is they're laying the groundwork that there is a little bit of wobbliness within the transition. And as Sean has said in the past, like, if another shoe drops, either with this person or another person, and as we talked about yesterday, that doesn't even get into, like, is Joni Ernst going to have a problem that he's saying women shouldn't serve in combat? Like,
yeah,
I think he's wobbly.
So here's an insight I had walking back from Family Friday at school today, and it's either totally mundane and obvious, or it's semi-brilliant. You be the judge. When the focus is on this personal stuff, right? The press organizes the entire drama around he said, she said, is this true? It takes the heat off of this other stuff in the media, but also for the senators. In other words, if Hegseth wins the public relations war over these accusations, this other stuff like no women in combat, and some of the other, and lack of experience, etc., I think the Republican senators can rally and say, hey, this was all about one thing. He survived that one thing. They're going to confirm him. Whereas if this other thing didn't exist, I think there'd be more scrutiny on these other questions about whether he's qualified. All right. Is that brilliant or mundane? Or neither?
The one thing that makes me wonder now that from Gaetz is, and I go back to this, the senators didn't humiliate Trump. It sounds like everything was communicated behind the scenes of, like, I'm not going to do this. Like, if you force it, I will. And who knows if, I wonder with Hegseth if the same thing is going to happen, that these senators they're going to say, we'll give him the process. We had a good meeting. He answered questions, but they communicate like, don't do this. And does Trump fold again?
Yeah. All right. Dan's. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Tricia. Go ahead.
On the combat in the military, I actually think that Pete Hegseth can use this to his advantage, not saying women shouldn't be in combat, but if he's able to kind of reclaim that and say, actually, we should be having discussions about what standards we have in the military. If you're in a life or death situation, if you're in the foxhole with somebody, I don't care if you're a man or a woman, but we shouldn't lower the threshold for these tests based on your gender. I think that's an incredibly fair conversation to have. And the fact that the American people are people will say that behind closed doors in the privacy of their own home, but they're not willing to say it out loud. I actually think that could be a really compelling case that he makes if he's willing to make that slight tweak.
That's a good point.
All right. Dan, are your Trump Treasury sources still not telling you a lot about what's going on?
Still won't tell me what
All
they're
right.
going to do. No.
Trisha, do you have any insight into what's going on with Treasury?
I don't have any real insight, but I think Hegseth, excuse me, Haggerty it's looking a lot better for him. And I also think his foreign policy chops are going to be really helpful here, given how much Trump used economic sanctions as part of his foreign policy under Treasury in the past.
All right. Here's what I know. Now, occasionally I get criticized when I say, like I said before the election, I thought one of the two candidates was likely to win by a lot, that there'd either be a surge of women voters at 55 or 56% of the electorate, and Harris would win by a lot, or there wouldn't, and Trump would win by 6 or 7 the battleground states. That's my reporting. I'm not going to make up stuff, but people say, well, you're so wishy-washy. That's not a real thing. I'm just telling you the best I know. If you don't want the best I know, mute or turn your speaker down. Here's the best I know. What's his name? Warsh. I'd say the most likely thing now is Warsh gets Treasury with a meaningless promise that he gets the Fed, when the Fed is available. Bessent gets NEC with a meaningless promise that when Warsh goes to the Fed, he goes to Treasury. I think that's the most likely scenario right now. I think second most likely is Bessent takes Treasury, Warsh just stands by for the Fed, and TBD takes the National Economic Council. Third most likely is door number 3. If you're an experienced Trump watcher, you know, if he's been sitting with names for more than 3 days, and he's been sitting with Warsh and Bessent for several days, sometimes he more often than not, he's like, this isn't a good list. Bring me more names. That's how we got Matt Gaetz. So I think third most likely is door number 3. I disagree with you, Trish. I do not think it is Senator Haggerty. I believe Senator Haggerty's out of it. Now, if they name Haggerty, please don't attack me. I'm just telling you what my sources are saying. I don't know. I'm not Donald Trump, but I don't think it's going to be Haggerty for a variety of reasons. So that's where it stands. It could happen today if he's going to go with one of the first two. Those guys are ready. If it's door number 3, it may go into next week. And that still leaves Peter Navarro and Bob Lighthizer without jobs. And that's got to be solved too. I still find it hard to believe he's not going to give them jobs. And if Peter Navarro could still go to the Council of Economic Advisors, which people think is a crazy fit, but whatever, still got to find a job for Lighthizer, maybe China. That's all I know. It's not very definitive because my sources are all over the map. And I have sources like Tricia saying, oh, it's going to be, they're back to Haggerty. I don't think those sources are right. We shall see. And again, it could happen during this program. And I sort of hope it does, because frankly, I'm sick of reporting on this thing. Been at it for a couple weeks. It's getting boring to me, or tedious. All right. I wrote this morning in my newsletter, if you judge Donald Trump by the standard, the political physics, this transition's a disaster, right? He nominated somebody for attorney general. They're gone. A lot of his nominees are controversial. He's not really driving much of a message, unless you count Trish's old boss, Ramaswamy and Musk. But Donald Trump doesn't play by the normal rules. So are Democrats getting any advantage from the relatively negative coverage about the transition, or they're so immaterial right now that no, or Trump is playing by different rules? Tricia.
No, I don't think so. I think this is just a drop in the bucket, right? I mean, he hasn't even been sworn in. So, I mean, they can say they put some Democrats can say they put some points on the board for taking down Matt Gaetz in the press, but I just think it's immaterial.
Dan.
Yeah, I don't think there's been any kind of good or bad for Democrats. I mean, I think this right now is a Republican kind of family discussion. It's a process set of questions and discussions that I think the public generally doesn't really put much stock in. And the only Democrat who's really been in the news is John Fetterman. I mean, just because he's such a quote machine and he speaks in such plain English. I think the only positive is if this had been a traditional environment where Trump were nominating kind of lowercase c conservative, nominees, there would be more scrutiny on just where the Democrats go from here, kind of how screwed up they are, all their problems, more autopsies on the campaign. And we're just really not having much of that. And so I think as long as the spotlight is elsewhere, it lets them hopefully regroup so that when they are back in the light, it's a more focused, unified, theory of the case than just scattershot, firing at each other.
Paul and Audra, I just texted you a video. Could you take a look and see if you think it's worthy to play on the program? And if so, cue it on up. Thank you.
Mark, I want to add really quick to Dan's point.
Go ahead. Of course.
We know the Democrats largely, their argument in this election was anything but Trump. We are not for you a message, but we're not Trump. And so this is kind of the same continuum. I don't think this scores really any actual points for them.
Well, and I
Again,
still,
go ahead.
I go back to, I am pretty certain that Chuck Schumer is trying to figure out where his caucus is. And I think Hakeem Jeffries is trying to figure out as well where the progressive base is. And he's trying to figure out, like, where are we going to pick our fights? Are people going to want to compromise on some stuff? And so I think the leaders don't know what they want to do. Just forget the politics outside the building.
Yeah.
They're both very consumed with, inside.
All right. So one more thing about the Democrats. Again, speaking of Democrats, please, I see there are Democrats on here who don't have your hands up. We want Democrats to raise your hands, be part of the conversation. So if you're a Harris supporter or a Democrat in general, please raise your hand to become part of the conversation. On this program and in my reporting, you got two schools of thought about the DNC chair job. One school says, meaningless, you're Joe Halperin for thinking anyone's going to care about who the DNC chair is. Other people say, no, the DNC chair is a big deal because it'll signal the direction of the party. It'll be about fundraising, messaging, etc. I've got kind of an intermediate view. If they pick someone who's awesome, like Ron Brown or Haley Barbour, then I think it's a big deal because I think that person can make a difference. I don't think Bill Clinton would have won in 1992 without Ron Brown, and I think Haley Barbour had a massive impact on helping the Republican brand come back, raising money, etc. So when I look at the field or potential field, I'm always looking: is there somebody in there who can raise money, drive a message on TV, bat heads together with governors and senators and members of the House to say, here's the message, hire the right consultants, not waste money, work with the state parties. That's hard, but there are people who can do that. And one person who can probably do that is the current ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel-san. Okay. So I believe what's going on is he's trying to see if the liberal backlash would be so great that it would be a non-starter, because you've already seen on social media and other places, liberals in the party saying, he's too moderate. Lynn Sweet, for those of you who don't know, is the longtime political reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. And she has what I would call a hate-love relationship with Rahm Emanuel. They'll both probably be mad about that. But anyway, so she today got on that story, what's going on with Rahm Emanuel. So Rahm Emanuel texted her this: first come home, second talk, and listen to folks at home about best way to serve and build what we care about. That's his text. Not a very artfully written text. He uses the word home twice in one sentence for one thing. But in any event, that seems to me like a placeholder. Lynn Sweet talks about, maybe he'll run for chair, maybe he'll run for governor. If Governor Pritzker, who is not term limited, because in Illinois they don't believe in term limits, maybe he'll run for Senate if my friend Dick Durbin, aforementioned, doesn't seek re-election. So here's my question. Of all the names you've heard, Dan, for possible DNC chair, is there anybody in Rahm's league, or as some of my sources say, is Rahm in a league by himself? And I'll point out that the other night with the very, very savvy Congressman Richie Torres, when I asked him who he favored for DNC chair, he said, oh, no one in particular. Rahm's really good. So what do you think? Are there other names that are in Rahm's league, or is Rahm in a league by himself?
There's no one else in Rahm's league. Rahm, I mean, forget the DNC chair, just in general, Rahm's history of political acumen, strategy, tactics, he understands. Look, the party chair job is infrastructure, fundraising, getting capabilities ready. I mean, I remember I was at the DNC with Terry McAuliffe in the end of 2002, 2003, going into the 2004 primaries. And everyone was like, what's our message, Terry? Like, how? And he's like, the candidate that emerges will dictate our message, but I am making sure that candidate has money, has a get out the vote operation ready to go, has a communications apparatus ready to go. Rahm does that better than anyone. And I think the other thing that makes Rahm very unique is, and Steve Elmendorf talked about this the other day. Part of where how you're going to operate in the future is what is your ability to be engaged in the fight online and through all these different ways to communicate now. Even as ambassador to Japan, for those who haven't followed this, Rahm has been like, pardon my language, fucking with the Chinese government, constantly tweeting at them, constantly like bashing. Like he's trying to get in their head and taunt the Chinese to the point where the State Department had to tell Rahm to kind of back off a little bit for our own, national security. Rahm would be superb as a chair, just trying to get in Trump's head every day and try to get him off his game while the party figures out kind of where it wants to go. And I think Schumer and Jeffries would have trust that Rahm understands that line, understands kind of the landmines that he wouldn't want to touch. And I think Rahm would try to make the progressive base happy in certain ways. He's going to piss them off in others, but he's smart enough to know I'll pick an issue or two that they will be very happy with me while the party figures out overall where it's going.
Tricia, you ever met Rahm?
I've never met Rahm, so I have to yield my time back to Dan.
No. When he, no, you can have a point of view. It's just when he comes back to the States, let's set that up. You'd enjoy talking to him.
He's unbelievable.
He's an interesting guy.
Direct.
Do you have a view of this? You don't need to, but do you have a view of Rahm just from afar and whether he'd be a good chair or?
I mean, his resume speaks for itself I mean, he does seem not just like a politician, but an operative as well, which I think can be an unusual mixture. But the Democrat Party absolutely needs a reset right now. And it sounds like he's the institutional guy who can kind of bring multiple coalitions together. And so it seems from the outside, very outside, like it could be his if he wants it, but he might have other ambitions.
Yeah. And just to be clear, I'm not denigrating the other people who might run or the two who are already in the race. They can also be excellent chairs. They just don't have the same thing that Dan described, which is this full package of a very public-facing, media-oriented and full strategy rather than deferring to some of the other folks. It's just a different model.
The other really important thing is the left isn't rallying around a candidate. I mean, if I were them, given, if they have like 4 other candidates in Rahm, like I think Rahm, for the worst thing for Rahm is probably if it's a 2-person race and the other person is progressive. Like, I think this is part of the bigger problem, which is the left just doesn't know where it wants to go. Does it want to focus and defend cultural issues? Does it want to rally around Bernie Sanders and try to own the economic, issue? What about Israel? Like, as long as they're divided, I actually think it plays to Rahm's strength because I don't think a single moderate will not want Rahm because they'll fear what the left may produce.
Yeah, although DNC members are not as a group particularly moderate, and that's the thing that I think would give him pause, and I think require him to have endorsements from prominent progressives and DNC members before he even got in the race, because otherwise I think you could see a majority of the DNC progressives saying we're for anybody but Rahm, and that means he can't win because even if he gets the most votes on the first ballot, he'd lose subsequently. All right. Again, we're going to you in just a moment. Everybody raise your hand if you want to ask a question, no matter who you supported for president. One more thing on the Democratic Party. Who better to hear from about the future, the current status and future of the Democratic Party than this guy?
I think it's insulting when members of the working class, which the Democratic Party has lost entirely in our lifetimes, to insist the economy is doing great. A 12-pack of Bounty is $40. Rich folks don't feel that. Poor folks already switched to Sparkle during the COVID, during the lockdown. And I think telling them that the NASDAQ is gangbusters is further insulting. It's insulting. I think the biggest unforced error of the Biden administration by far was the border. To tell people it's not a problem is insulting. For the working class to see incoming migrants getting welcome bags, debit cards, and motel rooms is probably insulting as well. So there's a lot of work to do. It was when they handed out camo hats that said Harris Walls, and the Democrats they were kind of charmed by that. Their party has gone quinoa, and the rest of America's eating at Cracker Barrel. And so it was kind of an ironic use of something millions of Americans put on their heads to start their day every day. Yeah, they need to reach out to America again and be less about what's called suicidal empathy, worrying so much about minority groups in society and in your party that you win the argument, but you don't win the election.
You may comment on what he said or on the jacket. Up to you, either of you.
I put my collar up. And by the way, the blinds are open. The sun came out. I am not sweating profusely at the topic of Democrats right now. But I see some people wondering about. Look, I kudos to Brian Williams. I mean, he just spoke very directly and passionately, and we could all quiver over whether he's the best spokesperson. But what he said is spot on and something we've talked about. And you know, the more people like Brian Williams that do speak out, you know, truthfully, the better. It's great.
Yeah, I have the same take. I mean, the diagnosis is right. I actually liked the suicidal empathy term he coined. I wonder if we'll hear that elsewhere. Wrong spokesperson. I mean, even the way of speaking, it seemed a little condescending and patronizing, with all due respect to Brian Williams.
All right. One more thing, which just came across my inbox here. Dan Scavino, longtime Donald Trump aide, tweeted this a little while ago. I wonder if heads would explode if I moved just a little bit north and ran in the special election for Elise Stefanik's seat in New York 21. Being she's going to the United Nations. I like that use of being. What do you guys think? Would heads explode if Dan Scavino ran for Congress?
Is he from the district?
No? Well, he says he lives a little bit south of the district. But he could move. He could get an apartment.
Sure, no, of course. In New York, of all the states where people have moved in to run, is yeah. I mean, look, I think it'd be awesome. He's unafraid to mix it up. I mean,
I don't know who else is thinking. I don't know who. I think I read that a lot of people are thinking of running.
Sure,
but it seems to me in a Republican primary, it's a very Republican district. In a Republican primary, if he had Donald Trump's full support, he'd probably win the seat, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Seems like a no-brainer if he did it.
I don't know who else is running, but even without knowing, it
You're
seems
a
like
mayor, a state senator, and somebody with some money.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to your questions again. Come in, tell us where you are. If it's not clear who you supported for president, what's on your mind, and let's start with Zach Alexander, up early.
Well,
welcome in, Zach.
Hey, folks. So I have I should say, I live in Oakland, California. I was a Harris supporter. I've been a Democratic voter for a long time. I have a request that I hope could elevate the quality of discussion here about D futures and so on, about what's next for Democrats.
Please.
Every time Democrats lose, the same conversation happens. I hear at least, and I know we want to be nice here, but there's like a mean word I always want to say about it, which is that it's brain dead. And I'll try to not say anything worse than that. And it often takes the form of people saying Democrats were too far left and need to be more in the center. And my problem with that is that, especially now, we are in the middle of a political realignment where the definitions of these words, left, right, center, is being redefined in America, and the associations between different issues like war, free trade, healthcare is being refactored among the parties. So when I was young, I used to think of being anti-war was a left-wing position. Here we have the Democrat campaigning with Liz Cheney and the Republican promising to end forever wars and end free trade and things like that, which also used to be more of a left-wing position, right? So everything is up for grabs. So I really wish we would be more specific. That's the request. So if I don't think the Democrats were too far left in a blanket sense. I think they were probably too far left on certain cultural issues for the country, and not far left enough for other things that are actually really popular, like being anti-war, being maybe against free trade or skeptical of it, pro-labor, raising the minimum wage, universal health care. Like these things are popular, and they didn't run on those. Does this make sense?
Right. Yeah, it does. Zach, I'll go first, and then the others. So again, the way I think about this is I organize around Ronald Reagan's three-legged stool: cultural, national security, and economics. Okay. On national security, I think it's not quite as inverted as you say, respectfully, because what people want is to keep America safe, right? They want America to not spend blood and treasure overseas, but they want the planet to be safe. Donald Trump has a policy of really big military, threaten people, speak loudly, but don't get in wars. And so that's a redefinition of strength, of what keeps America strong around the world. Different than, the John McCain, Joe Lieberman, Lindsey Graham, let's fight every war. And that's how we stay safe. But I'd still argue the Democrats are on the losing side of strength on national security. It's just defined differently. On social issues, you already agreed that the party's too far to the left. And I think that's not everybody agrees with that for sure, but you're not disputing that is a good thing. I think economics is the toughest one because Donald Trump was rated higher than the vice president on economics, although she did close the gap somewhat. Democrats have a theory of the case. Spend more money from Washington on programs for people, and that's how you help the economy. That's how you help working class and middle class people. And if you test individual things, higher minimum wage, more government spending on healthcare, infrastructure spending, more government programs in certain other areas, individually they test pretty well. But in general, I think the last two Democratic nominees, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and to some extent Hillary Clinton, I think they've struggled much more than Bill Clinton did to put that in a unified theory. Bernie puts it in a great unified theory, but Bernie's seen as too far to the left. So I think that the question is it the policies that are wrong? If you test them individually, it doesn't seem to be it. I think it's the overall, giving people an overall sense that they'll be, as Bill Bradley said when he ran for president, a good steward of a good economy. And I think it's up for grabs in economics within the party to say, are we the party of Bernie Sanders style economics, Medicare for all, higher minimum wage, student loan forgiveness, all of that stuff? Because while some of it tests well, if you can't explain how that goes into a growing economy for everyone, Republicans seem to have the upper hand. Tricia.
Yeah, Zach, I actually had a question for you. What issue do you think Kamala Harris should have run on differently that she actually could have won?
So, hold on, you're muted for some reason. Let's ask you to unmute again.
Yeah, there you
Go ahead, Zach. Great question.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was a bad situation in many ways, including she probably should not have been the candidate and should have run earlier. But if she was just trying to make the best of a bad situation, run on issues, I would have said focus on the economy about 10x stronger than she did. I think Dan said yesterday it was like 3 or 4 kind of small ball issues. I don't think anyone was persuaded by that. So I think that plus having a better story about immigration may have given her a fighting chance.
Yeah. My take on that, at least on the issues as far as the economy and immigration, I think that where the Democrats, it's not just the policy, but the real fault was telling American people, don't believe your lying eyes. We don't have an immigration problem. We don't have an inflation problem. And then for people to experience it themselves, you lose credibility and people just generally are not going to trust you. And then when Kamala Harris and Joe Biden finally kind of started to admit in the last 6 months, we do have an immigration problem. We're going to be tough on the border. We do have an inflation problem. Grocery prices are too high. It was too late at that point because it was, what have you been doing for the last 4 years? And the policy presented almost didn't matter.
Dan.
Yeah, so Zach, I agree with you a little bit, and I think if I haven't made clear, I thought I've tried to. I think you're right that within the party there is a split. Should they focus more on the Bernie RFK vote? Because Bernie started saying to Harris toward the end of the campaign, like, stop palling around with Liz Cheney. You're losing a segment of your base that's critically important, and at the same time, kind of where do they go on cultural issues, right? And then obviously when it comes to foreign policy, there is this split. And I think the Sanders wing and the Trump wings kind of merge on the other side of the circle, so to speak, and winning campaigns figure out how to appeal to both, right? It's not an either or. I think that where there's going to be, a lot of debate here is what froze Hillary and what froze Harris, and I think Biden just benefited from like total outrage in COVID, is the Democrats frequently don't want to say anything because they're afraid of offending an interest group. So why wouldn't Harris go on, Joe Rogan? And that would not have won her the election, but it's a good example. They couldn't get agreement and they were afraid that she was going to piss off the left if she started talking about certain issues. Why wouldn't they do anything on immigration? Not just her, but the Biden administration, because they were afraid if they did an executive order and cracked down, which is where the middle of the country was, they were going to anger and alienate the more extreme kind of immigration wings of the party that want a more open border and kind of welcome everybody. Israel and, what was going on in the Middle East. Got to worry about Detroit and Arab Americans. We got to worry about the Jewish population. So one day you leak that you've scolded Netanyahu. The next day you leak that you've approved basically every single piece of arms that they wanted. The only reason that Joe Biden was able to escape this was just like such horror and outrage and COVID and everything. But the last three nominees have essentially been trapped. And the one place Joe Biden sold out was when he got the nomination in 2020. He went to Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and said, I will basically outsource personnel to you. And that was why Bernie and Warren piped down and were so enthusiastic about it, because as Elizabeth Warren famously says, personnel is power. And so they put in all these staffers that were super, super progressive and liberal, who shut down conversations, anything that was going to be moderate. And that's where I think there's frustration that the party's too progressive, right? That they're kind of lost their bearings. But I agree with you completely that it's not black and white anymore, and Trump has realigned things, and we have to think broader.
Zach, thank you.
Can I make a quick clarification?
Yes, sir.
My pet peeve was not directed at you, Dan. I appreciate everything you said.
That's okay. I don't take any offense.
No. It's usually been a guest that come in and we'll just say left or right as a kind of shorthand. And I'm like, on what issue?
Yeah. Zach, really helpful. Thank you. And this was point. I don't know if you were with us last night, but last night we had a progressive point out that Congressman Torres, who makes the argument about going to the center, is in fact pretty moderate, pretty progressive on a lot of issues, just not on everything. Say again. All right, Zach, thank you. All right, I am supposed to be an expert on politics, right? Wrong. Someone pointed out to me something I knew, but I'd forgotten. They don't have primaries in New York for special congressional races. The party committee, the county chairs from the district have a weighted vote. And you often will have a Republican candidate and a conservative candidate, although they can be the same person. My person who's telling me this, who I trust implicitly, says something that sounds vaguely familiar. Roger Stone's already supporting a candidate in the district. Doesn't mean that person wouldn't win. It's possible that this makes it easier for Dan to win, because he wouldn't have to win a primary, because presumably the county chairs might be swayed by Donald Trump, but they also might be more inclined to vote for someone who actually has roots in the district. So sorry to misinform everyone. I apologize, but I don't remember everything all the time, particularly when I'm a little addled. All right, now, here's someone else. Happens to be another Harris supporter. Is your name not Zach, but Zach? Or is that a typo?
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, is your name Zach?
Yeah, it's Zach. It's short for Zechariah.
Zechariah. So we've had Zach, a Harris supporter, and now Zach, a Harris supporter. Zach, where do you live?
I live in Utah.
In Utah. So you're the Democrat in Utah.
Yeah, that's
always
right.
Make that, always make that joke. There are a lot of Democrats in Utah. Zach, welcome in. How'd you find out about two-way?
Meghan McCain, she put on a podcast recently with, she said like 13% of her listeners are men, and she thought that none of them were straight. So I'm just here to tell her I'm hi. But I've been following her for about 8 years, and then I followed you. I found you back about 8 years ago when you were on Morning Joe. So really appreciate all the work you do.
Zach, I'll break the news right now, apropos of what you just said. Amongst our guests at 5 o'clock this evening on a special time episode of Two Way Tonight, the aforementioned Meghan McCain.
Oh, nice.
So please join us. What time is it in Utah? You 2 or 3 hours?
It's 2, so 7:44.
2. So at 3 p.m. when you're on your afternoon siesta, please join us. Zach, the floor is yours.
Thanks.
What's up?
So registered independent now, actually. Was Democrat, voted Bernie back in the day, and then Hillary, and then just became a little more pragmatic as I grew up a bit, I think. My question really came back from the conversation around Rahm Emanuel. Speaking of pragmatism, like I love all the qualities he has. My wonder is if someone could really present maybe like a radical change to superdelegates or something that would really appeal to the Bernie supporters who kind of got frustrated, could that then tie the party behind him? Because I do think we need a fighter, someone who's going to bring us a little bit more logic. I do think things have gone too far left on social issues. That's why I kind of became more independent. I can't, and not even too left to the prior person's comment, but honestly more undefined. Like, we're not willing to take a stance on what is a trans right. Like they're people, they need to be respected, but also what are where are the limits? Like majority rule, minority rights. What does that look like? So
Yeah.
anyway, that's my question. Just like
so Zach, you're saying if somebody ran with a package of reforms that made the process more open, like don't try to keep people off the ballot,
right.
maybe get rid of whatever caucuses remain, have
Something
a
that could get,
calendar,
something other
of
than like, oh, let's shove it with a bunch of progressive staffers. Like, wait, let's just make structural change that
Yeah,
allows for
that's a
more
great,
voices.
very interesting idea that we'll incorporate into future discussions. Tricia, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that there's a deep distrust right now of the Democrat establishment. I think with what happened to Bernie Sanders, I completely agree with you. I think that they could use a shakeup and use this time to really reset things. But Zach, I was curious to you because we are kind of at this milestone for the Democrat Party where they're figuring out who is really their leader going to be. As kind of former Democrat, independent, who's the kind of figure that would make you want to rejoin the Democrat Party, that would make you vote in 2020 for a Democrat?
Yeah, I just think it's someone who's at least willing to, for me, and maybe this is like a genie in a bottle, but it's just like someone who's willing to take the stance on like I said, like abortion. Like we have no policy. It's just kind of like this random all in all, and I don't think there's a clean marketing message behind it. I mean, we were succumbed to the same concept with defund the police, which is not a good idea. And so, I don't know if I have a person on the top of my mind. Like locally, I voted for Spencer Cox. Like I think he's been an awesome moderate. Like I don't think he's in a state where he could just go to the right as far as he wants. And he's chosen to have that character to say, no, 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 I want to respect my constituents, but I also want to realize that there's another party here. And so I don't know who the person is, but for me, it's a person like that who's willing to have progressive ideas. I think there's a lot of things we need to solve, but not at the expense of like, oh, let's not offend everybody. And I just think there just needs to be a little more logic. So.
Yeah,
Dan.
that's a great. I mean, if I were Ram and I'm listening, I think that I would co-opt that idea in a heartbeat. And I think you're seeing something similar play out. We haven't talked about this much. Democrats give ranking assignments on committees based on seniority. So this goes back to when there was, unfortunately, quite a bit of racism in the party, and blacks would often get shut out from secret ballot votes for committee chairs. But what that has created is you don't have to do anything well. You don't have to be a good team player. You don't have to have good ideas. You don't have to raise a lot of money to help your colleagues. You just, rise up because you entered in whatever year and you're the oldest person with the most experience on the dais, and therefore it's your committee chair. And
Dan, I got to interrupt you for some breaking news because Dan Scavino had way too much Gatorade or something this morning because he's tweeted again. And this one's even newsier than the previous one. Just spoke to President Trump regarding Mike Rogers going to the FBI. It's not happening. In his own words, quote, I have never even given it a thought. Not happening. MAGA is very against Mike Rogers, but I find this kind of interesting. Like Dan Scavino doing play-by-play of his conversations with Donald Trump about a personnel matter. Unorthodox, happens all the time, but for him to go ahead and tweet that, maybe because there was a MAGA uprising. I don't know. Tricia, what do you think of that?
Well, I remember, was it maybe a week or two before the election, Dan Scavino saying, essentially, we will remember who was with us since the beginning, and basically not letting maybe members of the establishment or people who hadn't been 100% loyal to Donald Trump into that circle or into that cabinet. I think that this is almost more of the same of that. He might feel like Donald Trump has voices in his ear that would encourage maybe a Mike Rogers or more establishment neoconservative types into the cabinet. And I think he is taking the liberty of reassuring the MAGA base that's not happening. People who are part of the base, like myself, still have the president's ear.
I'd love to know what Dan did between hearing Donald Trump say that and deciding to tweet it. Like, did he ask the president? Presumably. Did he ask Susie Wiles or Jason Miller? Like, I wonder who cleared that tweet, or he was just freelancing. Because again, he already tweeted about running for Congress. So he's got an itchy trigger finger. Dan, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that was breaking news. Please continue.
Yeah, and I'm curious if, given the fact that, apparently Trump called Matt Gaetz and said, you don't have the votes, you need to get out. One of the things I'm curious about is the right's been pretty quiet because they moved on to Pam Bondi. I do wonder if it's throwing a little bone to the base that's like, we're going to walk and chew gum here. Gaetz is overboard, but we hear you on this, and let's start the morning news cycle with this. Anyway.
Could be, but it's not Dan's job to drive message, although he's very good at it. But it just kind of, I would like to know the background there. Zach, thank you for joining. Please come back regularly. I'm sorry, Dan, did you want to finish up?
I was just going to say, Zach, just to finish their thing, there is this uprising from younger members that we have to stop allowing what's now going to be ranking members in the minority to have those jobs just because of seniority. And we need to be more competitive and dynamic and let people bring ideas and kind of energy and passion. And it's the same thing of like super delegates. It's just because it's always been that way and they have all this power and they get a good reservation at the convention. Let's shake this up a little bit. I think you're onto something.
Michelle, before Zach goes, welcome in. Do you want to ask Zach any questions about Utah, Bernie Sanders, anything?
No, beautiful state. I'm jealous a little bit.
It's great.
All right.
Starting.
All right. Zach, have a great day. Thank you, man.
Thank
We'll see you at 3 Mountain if you can't get enough of Megan, which is a rational position. Thank you for joining. All right. Michelle, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind as a Trump supporter.
I'm in Virginia. I just wanted to jump on here quickly and kind of reinvigorate the conversation on the MAHA movement. And the anesthesiologist who was on a couple of days ago, who sort of highlighted some of the concerns of the healthcare infrastructure and some of the care models that are being delivered and how we're not meeting the needs of the people. I am a nurse practitioner by training. I've been in my role for over a decade. I've been in healthcare for over 15 years. And I can't express this enough, the gaps that are there that are working against clinicians and providers in the healthcare system. And I think that patients, we all feel it. We've all kind of had our own encounters with the healthcare system. It's broken. The one thing I wanted, a couple of different points on this. The one is the providers. I can't express how much the providers, the physicians, NPs, nurses, PAs, et cetera, deeply, deeply care about doing a good job and caring for people the right way. But the problem is the system is built to work against providers being able to do that. And it works against patients as well. And I think that I just want to kind of highlight that feature in and of itself. The other piece I wanted to kind of address, and for those of you who are not familiar with functional medicine, I kind of went on my own little science experiment recently and explored the sick care model, the functional medicine model. It is, if you're not familiar with it, it's incredibly different. It's not voodoo. It's not out in left field. I'll just kind of quickly highlight, I met with a nutritionist for an hour. They had a food log. They talked about stress and sleep and like everything kind of about, like whole wellness and whole patient. And as opposed to 15 minutes with a primary care saying, you're good, see you next year, right? And she was lovely. Both were lovely people, but the models are very different. And so that kind of speaks to the preventive care gaps that we have and what models are out there that are not available to people enough. And they are kind of expensive. So I think that's a big feature of it as well. The thing that I think I kind of wanted to highlight is that the training programs, as we mentioned, the physician mentioned the other day, the docs don't get any nutrition education, for example, in their training. I think that, and I don't want to kind of tout my own profession here, but nurse practitioners are sort of uniquely positioned to actually embark on a little bit more of the MAHA movement because there's not that capture from the AMA. It's a totally different pathway and a totally different training sort of experience and mentality. I had an entire semester of nutrition in order to get into nursing school. It wasn't advanced nutrition, but it was something. And I had a required course on complementary alternative medicine, Reiki, acupuncture, massage therapy, music therapy, you name it. I had training on communication. And so, may not maybe seem that way because I'm nervous, but the point is that
you're doing great. You're doing great.
The
Very
point is that my background is a little bit different, and though I absolutely adore my physician colleagues and they're just phenomenal people and clinicians, I do think that if Casey and Callie Means, if they were advising RFKJ and if they built a coalition of people that included some other sort of practitioners to sort of get trained and explode this sort of portion of healthcare delivery, it might look a little different for patients sooner than solely focusing on the physician training, because unfortunately, I think that's going to be much, much slower than the nimbleness that I think NP programs can be, and maybe to some degree PA, but they're sort of still tied to the AMA. So just a couple of thoughts on that in general. And I do think that the MAHA movement and RFKJ, I think the Harris camp was stupid to not have entertained him when he decided to bow out. I know a lot of, my friends and, people, other moms on social media. I'm a mom of 3. We're the purchasers a lot of times and the grocery planners and, things like that. And it is near impossible to actually, purchase food that's not extraordinarily expensive to feed your family. And I feel like we're operating with our hands tied behind our backs just to try to feed our kids, a reasonable meal that's not, has all these, side, byproducts and chemicals and things like that. And so I do think there's a portion of the electorate that said, you know what, that's it for me. I'm on the fence. I'm considering, both of these candidates, but this is the one. This is the one because I'm tired of operating under a system that works completely against me. And unfortunately, I feel like I'm, as a nurse practitioner and as a mom, my hands are tied behind my back professionally in some ways, as well as in my home life. So I just wanted to I know you don't have a lot of time, highlight a couple of those points, just because I think, it's
Michelle,
an interesting place that we find ourselves.
Michelle, that's fantastic. I'm wondering whether you'd be willing to come on with our favorite Tennessee doctor and talk more about these issues over the course of an hour. Is that something you might be able to do?
I'd be interested. Yeah. I think this is an inflection point that we found ourselves in. I think people are interested in listening and craving something that looks different.
Yeah.
And I think we need to continue the conversation to figure out what that looks like long term.
Yeah. Yeah. We're trying to do not an hour, maybe even a weekly program on all these issues because they're hugely important. And I just on on the patient side, I agree with you about nurses versus doctors. Nurses are going to be they're already better trained on this stuff. They're much more nimble about changing, and they're just, in my experience, not universally, just they're at least equally attuned, and in some cases more attuned to the needs of the patient and some of the chronic failures on the patient's part to come in as healthy as they could be when they're not seeing a professional and just in their daily lives. So, Tricia, comments, questions?
So first of all, thank you for your insight and what you do. I am very much on my MAHA RFK information finding journey. So I have 2 questions for you. One policy that is like you are gung-ho that RFK has presented. And then a second is, of course, there's a lot of controversy about RFK. Is there anything he has said, particularly in the medical sphere, that you say, not for that, or that's not sound science?
I think that with RFK, you have to take, any one of us can have really good ideas that need to be modified and really bad ones. So I feel that with RFK as well. To your first point or your first question about something that I'm gung-ho about, there are a few. I think that the additives in our foods, that's an easy win. And that's something that's already happening in other countries. Why here? The Fruit Loop example that people, talk about in the press, but like it's that, times 1,000. There's so many different examples, the seed oils, the additives in our foods, to get that out of our foods. I can't take my kids to a soccer game and some parent provides, a snack afterwards. And you're just like, what? There's so much, it's just junk. So that's one. The other part is pesticides. It's, I don't have enough knowledge on the regulatory component and how do we kind of protect some of the businesses and things like that. I don't know how that disrupts things in terms of the regulatory agencies. But if the pesticides and some of the additives, the harmful additives in foods, seed oils and the food dyes and things like that, if that could go, I think a lot of people would at least start to breathe a sigh of relief, like at least we're getting somewhere. In terms of the scientific community, I know for a fact that there's a lot of, and I know there's another physician on here. I saw him in scrubs. Brad, I saw him up top. But I know that there are incentive structures for medical publications, and I know you have to go soon. At academic institutions, you can't get tenure. If you're expected to produce research, you're expected to produce research. And so there's a little bit of this conflict of interest there in and of itself, not only, kind of more broadly in the FDA, et cetera, with some of the allegiances with pharmaceutical companies. So I think that needs explored. I don't know enough about it to know exactly where the kind of, big gaps are and the major problems are. But if we can just start to address some of the food and pesticides and things, I think a lot of people across the country would be like, thank you, finally, something.
Michelle, thank you. We are at time, although, the internet's infinite. We could keep going. It's going to kill both Jacqueline London and me not to bring Jacqueline in because she's hugely expert on these issues. But we're going to bring her back with you and Dr. John, I hope. I'll just say, Jacqueline, really am sorry because I love listening to you talk about this stuff, but we're at time. But we'll talk more about it because it's a huge issue. Part of the conception of two-way in the political vertical, and I'll say again, two-way is going to expand in 2025 into sports and music and health and personal finance and all sorts of things. But part of the idea is to basically bring in members of the community like Dr. John and Michelle and Jacqueline, who are passionate experts, who feel part of this community and aren't, whether they're Trump supporters or Harris supporters, that's not what it's about. It's about a national conversation that brings people together with peace, love, and understanding, where facts matter and alternative thinking matters. And I think from the beginning, I said about Bobby Kennedy, for all the flaws that he has as a person and as a political leader, he was talking about issues that resonated with people, including parents. And all of us as parents know how important it is to hear public officials say things that will help us have healthier kids, mentally healthy, physically healthy, etc. And he's been doing that from the beginning, and it struck a chord. And I really do think on the political front, it helped Donald Trump win because he embraced that agenda and he talked about it. I'm not sure how much he actually believes in it, to be fair, because he never talked about it before. But to his credit, he mentioned it. He gave Kennedy a platform to do it. And I think it's fantastic. And we want this to be a place where ideas like that, healthier kids who could be against it, right? Where that can be discussed by not just experts who we book to come on, but people like Michelle and Jacqueline and John, who are practitioners and experts and passionate about it, whether they're parents or not, who understand its importance. So we'd love to have you back. We'll talk more about it. I'm sorry that we're at time, and I'm sorry we didn't get to other people, including Jacqueline, but 5:00, come on back. We'll talk more about it. Michelle, thank you. Please come back regularly. And if you can, send us your information so we can be in touch to see if it's possible for you to be part of planning a show or two with us, with John and Jacqueline and others. Okay. Thank you. So tonight at 5 Eastern, again, not 6. Don't show up at 6. We won't be here. 5 Eastern. Celinda Lake and Ed Goaz, two great pollsters, will be here to talk about a new poll that they have. She's a Democrat. He's a Republican. They polled together for years. They're amongst the best in the business. They're fantastic. We'll go over their poll with them and talk about it. And then, as I mentioned, Megan will be here, and always love hearing what Megan has to say. And Megan will be very opinionated about, if nothing else, Matt Gaetz. So tune in for that. And then next week, warning you now, some of you like the show a lot. Some of you even use the A word and say you're addicted to two-way. So I feel obligated to tell you, you're going to have to find some substitute, because we're not doing shows next Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. No morning meeting. No Sean, no Trisha, no Dan. No two-way tonight. Now, if there's breaking news, could we pop up? Sure. But no regularly scheduled programs next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And warning you now, we'll be taking some other days off around the holidays, as hard as that is to believe. So if you are addicted to two-way, find some suitable substitute. Trisha, thank you for joining us. We're so grateful you were here. I barely remember that Sean was part of the program at any time. Sean who? I know. Yeah. But thank you for coming. We hope you'll come back regularly. And we'd love to have you as part of the medical stuff we're doing and the health stuff, because I can tell from the way you talk about it, you care about it a lot and you've thought a lot about it. So please consider coming back. Dan, are you going to come on at 5?
I will be on. Absolutely.
All right.
Yep.
All right. So bonus appearance by Dan. Finally, what are you guys doing this weekend? Trisha?
I'm going to Florida.
Florida, the free state of Florida? Are you up? Are you a last minute possibility for Treasury Secretary?
You never know these days.
Never know. What's your position on the Fed? Do you want them to be independent or a wholly owned subsidiary?
Independent.
Independent. All right, you'll never get the job.
Feel very
Dan.
strongly.
Okay. Dan, what are you up to?
Well, totally unrelated to Trisha, I am also headed to Florida on Sunday morning, and I will be there Monday and Tuesday. Let me just warn you now, there will be no sport coat. There will be no pocket square. We will be tropical Dan Monday and Tuesday, but taking my wife away, who very much has earned and deserves time off.
Florida man.
Awesome. Awesome.
Florida man.
Anybody interested in what I'm doing?
Mark, what are you doing this weekend?
I'll tell you in 3 simple words, and then I'm gonna jump off the Zoom because I can't bear to take any follow-up questions. 3 simple words: Eras Tour Toronto. Have a good weekend, everybody. But I'll see you at 5.
I want
and then
selfies. Selfies on Twitter.
Oh, there'll be a lot. I'll see you at 5, and then I'm leaving on a jet plane. Shake it off.
Elton John. All right.
Swifty.
Thank you.